So with us having set up all the LODs, with a collision being created and the material being set up properly, all we have to do is hit pre-export, export, Ctrl Z. We only have to copy in our export information and hit import. And here we have the broom, with our material automatically working, the collision being set up automatically, and the texture settings also being exported correctly. Alright, I just wanted to make a relatively short, well, I don't know if it will be short, video about Blender, how I export my assets to Unreal, because I created my own custom add-on for that, for exporting from Blender and importing to Unreal, right? And I want to record a video how I do that, because it's not very straightforward at the moment. I could probably rewrite the add-on, make it more straightforward, but that takes a lot of time, right? It's a complex add-on. So I'm just mainly going to record a video for myself, and you can get along if you want to. Now you can see I have my broom here. It's fairly optimized already, but we are going to do this in a moment. Anyway, where I usually start is by create folders up here, right on top. I need to check out that I'm not above anything. All right. And the first thing I will do is I will right click, create a new collection, and I call this main_broom. I don't know why I did that. I just at some point decided this is a good idea. It's not really, there's better ways, but anyway. The thing I'm reading here is the main_. It needs, and then I'm going to click create main folders, and then I can decide how many LODs I want. It's not really set in stone yet, but I'm just going to add like 4 or something. The maximum usually is like 7. You cannot really have more than 7, but I'm going with like, let's say 4. That way we get a folder structure that is pretty much describing what we can add, right? And the first thing I'm going to add is Shift Z, so I'm in the world center, right? Let's center this out. Shift A, and I'm going to create an empty right here. This empty goes into the parent collection. It will sort of act as the origin of our object. The next thing, I will take my broom here, and I'm going to drop this into LOD 0, because this is going to be the highest detail, and I'm going to reset this. Now, when I'm going to place this, it will ignore the actual origin and will use, as I said, the empty as an origin. What we have to do is that we have to select the mesh, then the empty Control P object. So with that, this is correct. I'm just going to place it wherever I think my origin should belong. I think I will do something like this here. This seems about right. Now I think the next thing I'm going to do is adjust the material, because we definitely want to export our textures and whatever we did in the material, right? Now the most important thing is that we get the texture working. The thing with textures is Unreal expects certain sets of textures. If we take a look at one of those textures here, you will have very particular settings for every texture. For example, if we take a look at normal diffuse textures, right? They usually have this from texture group, they are compressed without alpha if you don't have alpha, right? Makes it a little bit more efficient. And compressor settings are like default, BC1 or whatever in the new Unreal Engine 4.5 or whatever I'm in. And where is it? Right here, usually sRGB is on. If you, for example, compare this to like an alpha texture, you usually have from texture group alpha, right? And no sRGB, because this is not, sRGB is like corrected for the eye so the colors look right, yeah? Because technically we are not seeing the correct colors. Little tangent, doesn't really matter. The point is you have different textures, some are information, some are visual, and depending on those things, you have different settings, right? That's why it's important to get the textures correct with my add-on in order to export them correctly. Now, I already have a texture here, though this texture has no information about what it actually is, because I took it from Substance Painter. However, over here, I have a setting create texture. And if I take a look here, I can set the texture size. I don't know what my texture is right here. Right, my texture is 2K. So I'm just going to make this 2K 2048. And then I have like texture settings right over here. And I clearly want a default texture. There are some different settings, and for example, I always wrote like a fairly big description to it, so I even know later on what it is, settings in Unreal and whatever, right? And I want just a default color. Now there's an additional name we can give it. I don't want an additional name right now, so I'm just going to delete this. And with my object selected and the right material selected, because we could have multiple, right? I'm going to create the texture. Now, this will create the texture based on the name we gave it up here and whatever it is. So like a diffuse texture, right? And if we take a quick look on export, I can open the folder wherever I saved my Blender file, right? Also, all those options or most of those options only work if you actually saved your project here. This will not work if you didn't save the Blender file. So I'm just going to open really quickly my folder here. And if we now take a look in my structure right here, I saved my Blender file. And next to it, suddenly I have a broom folder. Within this broom folder, I suddenly have a textures folder. And in here, there is the texture. Just by creating it, it automatically created the folder structure next to our Blender project. Now, the only thing is that we now have a black texture, right? But I want actually my correct texture over here. Now, we could just bake it. It's actually not that complicated. We could literally just bake it with a mission and whatever. However, I also have another way for doing that. And that other thing is called move your image channel. I don't know, I gave it a weird name here. First of all, I'm going to copy the images I want, the image names. So what I want to do is I want to move from the broom base color, right, to my new texture broom div. What do I want to move? I want to move R first of all, and I want to move it into R. And I'm not going to override any channels here. With that not being checked, the lower value does not matter, and I'm going to click this very quickly here. And we can see now suddenly, oh, the texture is green. Now let's take a look at the other one. At the broom div. Ooh, it moved the red channel over, right? And I'm just going to do this with green as well. So let's just move over green as well. Move your image channel. This is not as fast as baking, but if the texture has the same texture resolution, this works pretty much as well, just moving it over. Important really is just that it's directly the same texture size, yeah, because it's literally reading every single pixel. And now we can see the original texture, so the broom base color, or whatever it was, it's going to be black, and our broom div, the new one, is now has the correct color. Now we could have literally just baked it as well. I just wanted to show this off, so I also remember it exists, right? An extension of that add-on is also in here, custom image. This has you can do manually, you can tag textures manually the same way they are tagged when you create them. I just think it's easier to create a new one and then do it. It's just in case you ever need to change something about it. I have this whole extra setting thing here where you can read the tags and whatever. All I really want to show in here is the save your image, because this image is currently dirty. We can see it has like a star next to it, and I can just hit save and it should save it. You can obviously also save all the images and whatever. I think I coded this in like a roundabout way where I'm like recreating the texture for whatever reason. It was a lot safer than just baking it, and we can see now we have this texture in here. Important here is really just that it has the correct tags. Yeah, so it's exactly this one. Again, you could probably also just taking the old one and tagged it correctly, but usually creating it from the beginning is fairly safe. Now the next thing is knowing which material to choose in Unreal, because Unreal uses material instances, right? You usually have like a master material. Let's see if I can get this bigger here. You usually have your master material here, and then you right click, you make instances of it, right? I have an instance right next to it. And then you can modify the textures in here and emission, I don't know. Yeah, you can, this is how this usually works out. You will have to know in Unreal which material it will become. You have to know this beforehand. It's not a big deal because you already sort of have a master material. If you work logical, you will have a master material it's going to be supposed to use, all right? This is not something you create after importing the thing. All of your, or let's say most of your default assets will use the same material. I'm not using a final material here, I'm just using a placeholder at the moment. I will have to do this properly later on the material, but the point is you will have a master material and you will need an instance of that master material because it will take a copy of the instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the name here, and over here in Blender, you can give it a create future material instance. You can select it, Control V, the exact name it will have in Unreal, and click it and it will tag the material with that name. Below here you will see there will be a name if you tag it. However, there's also another way. I already prepared a material that's the equivalent of the one in Unreal. Essentially, it's pretty much working the same. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the whole brew material I already have here. So I'm just going to drop it out. I'm going over here in the Blender, file under materials, and I'm just going to completely annihilate the brew material because I don't really need it anymore. Looked nice, but I will have to deal with that in another way. And I'm going to drag it from my asset browser on here. And you will see that I already prepared this. Actually, this was completely the wrong material. Meant to use simple opaque master instance, this one here. And you can see I already prepared it with everything I need. And I'm going over here where it says diffuse, and I'm just going to flobble in my, actually I should also use delete this texture. I'm going to put in my group texture. And when we're already added, I'm going over here under the Blender file under, it's important when you're like sorting your assets to keep everything very clean. I'm going to delete the old broom texture because we don't need it anymore. It's literally the same, just with the right tags. Now for me that's sort of already it. However, I want to mention a few things here because I did a few things already automatically by dropping the material on. For example, you can see that my texture here, my texture node has a tag in the front of it, as well as like I have a weird static switch node and a float node with also a Japanese tag. The reason for that is that I coded this very early on and I didn't know how to tag things properly, give it its own properties, as you would say in Python. The way you can create those is by going into create future parameters. And here you can create future parameters. Let's just make one really quickly. And you will need to know the name of the parameter in Unreal. So back here, in your master material, not in the master material, but in a material instance, you will have to know what goes where. Yeah. So for example, the diffuse texture, I already know which material will become. I will know which instance it will copy, and I will know in which slot my diffuse texture will go. These are things you should already know. It's just more logical. I know most people just wing it, export, oh, now one thing, now export the other thing, and now the texture. Now, those are things you already should know. You should already know where. You should already have an actual material to go to. And by knowing this name, this exact diffuse texture name, I can drop this right in here, right? Diffuse texture. I'm just going to call this 2, because if you looked already, I already have one. I just made this within my asset, so I just dropped it on and I already had it. But if I click now on create parameter, you can see I created this parameter here. It's nothing special, it just has the tag in the beginning essentially. And the same way you can create vector parameters or static switches. I'm not going to go into detail here. If you already used Unreal, you're going to know what are static switches. It's essentially this one here, and it allows you to statically switch between different states, so it creates a new instance of the material instead of, you have to look into this yourself. But like, for example, that way you can set the metallic right of the new material with a texture or whatever. If you want to set it from like texture, you would probably create a texture, but probably masked, right? I also wrote it in there. It's going to probably be mask or one of those. Anyway, I guess I could adjust a little bit metallic here. It's going to be stylized anyway, wouldn't hurt. But I'm going to keep it 0. What do we do about the... Right, I have a switch actually for the specular and float. And then I wrote it down here, use masked and whatever channel is used for what. This I just defined within my personal material. You can define it any other way. Now let's go to some more exciting things like the LODs, because there is quite a lot of stuff that the thing does automatically for me. Now, actually the most exciting part are the textures, because the textures, every texture I'm going to use will be, I put a lot of work into this, perfectly color management, have the perfect settings in Unreal. So this is actually the most exciting part, because most of you, trust me, I know for a fact most of you will not know the correct settings for the textures. The correct textures they should have in Unreal. You don't know this. I did such extensive research on that and optimized when, for example, you look at that. Description: unlike masked material, translucent draw the whole texture at the same time. Uses fairly strong compression to minimize texture size. I wrote a freaking book inside of those descriptions, yeah? The point is that, for example, when you're using translucent materials, I think it was, they draw the texture at once. However, if you use clipped or masked, they draw the texture from the alpha separately. So you want to have those separate. For example, so you want to have essentially the alpha in a separate texture. If you're only using masked materials. If you're using translucent, it's fine to have it within one or something along this line. I wrote it in there. I would need to read it out, but it's in there. Anyway, to the LODs. Let's just copy the room here, and I'm going to drop this into the other LOD here. Sometimes it gets stuck and it gets linked. I don't know why it does that. That's not a part of my add-on, but for some reason, whenever I drag it, I think if you hold Control or so yeah, it does it automatically. I usually don't hold Control, but it still links it. And then you have to go in, right-click it, and unlink. There we go. Alt-G. So it's overlapping. I'm going to turn off LOD 0, and we're going to take a look here and try to minimize that. I'm not gonna lie, usually I really dislike doing that because this happens, right? However, if you go inside edit mode and you just select things and X dissolve the edge, it will not kill the UV and the texture. So I'll just do that handish now. So now I created my LODs here. Let's take a quick look. Relatively high poly. Now obviously I could have made give it a little bit more detail here, which I might do. The second one I reduced, I merged a little bit. The next one I merged even more, right? This is fairly flat here, just triangles mostly and whatever. Beside that, the last one I cheesed a little bit where I used a data transfer modifier with a face corner, UVs, and then I just chose nearest face interpolated or something like along those lines, and I transferred the UV to a extremely low poly version, because it really does not matter when you're like that far away. The only thing that you don't want to happen is like popping out, right? So make it really low poly for the last one. Usually you should probably have a few more than just 4, but this is fine. I'm going to use the stylized shaders. It's not that complicated, honestly. We do have a few options here. Let's just go through this really quickly. Select face by matte. You could use this. It's just you're giving it the name, and you could just select the faces by the material. Now the whole thing is one material. I don't know why I needed that. I did it in there, put it in there, whatever. All right, the create folders that we did in the beginning. Here in the create future matte instance, as I explained, you usually should know which material instance your object will have in Unreal, and this is going to tag it with that name. Create future material instance parameter. You can give it certain material parameters, which you then will set in Unreal. Create texture. We went over this earlier. You can create textures with it tagged correctly for Unreal. It's not just going to create textures also, it will also create the correct structure on your PC next to the Blender file. It will automatically tag the textures for Unreal to know what settings it should have. Described. Let's go with described. The pre-export we go over in a second. Let's go over a few things, other things first. We have to set collection origin. This, I think, I never really used this. I think I intended this to be like when you have your objects and you have them all like placed next to each other and next to each other, right? You can set the collection origin here, which will essentially, I actually don't know if the setting is still a thing, so I should probably look into this. I never really used it. It should allow you to offset the thing, right? And then you set collection origin and then everything will be fine on the export. But I'm just going to keep my objects all overlapped right here. Now the create automatic imposter. I'm not going to do this here, but as a quick teaser, what this will essentially do for you is if you take a look at my grass here, and I turn off all the LODs except the last one, you can see this is essentially an imposter. Yeah, it's just going to be crossing planes, and it's essentially just a one-click solution for that. It also automatically bakes the textures correctly. Yeah, it does pretty much everything automatically, and it really does not matter when you're like that far away. This is what you're usually doing it efficient, right? Especially for grass. I will probably make a lot more videos about creating objects with that add-on because it can actually do a lot, and I will probably at some point create an imposter using that. Now to the LOD screen size. Now we can select our broom in here, or my broom. You probably don't have a broom. You can use a lot of different curves to set the LODs. For example, let's just use linear for a moment and hit linear, and you can see You have to rethink this a little bit if you don't know Unreal, but it will essentially take a screen size. The LOD 0 is going to be shown at a screen size of 1. So essentially, if the whole object takes the whole screen, if the whole screen is taken by the object, so something like this here. However, the next one only will go at like 0.67. So somewhere, I don't know, probably here. Yeah. It's just a lot of different curves. Not all of them make actual sense. Some of them just literally don't make sense. Let's just see. Because you cannot have something like this here. Yeah? You always have to like steadily decreasing numbers. And the best thing I found is, what was it? I think, yeah, ease in export. This is usually the best thing I found to work, and I'm just going with that. It's a pretty good preset. And the min target obviously for like the last one, so you don't go too low. And then you can hit LOD screen size, and what will happen is that if you select one of the LODs right here and go to the collection settings, am I over it? I'm over it. You select one of the LOD collections and you go to the collection size, and if you scroll down you will see, oh, LOD settings. You can essentially set the LOD screen size for the LOD right here in the collection settings. LOD 1 will have the 0.1 and the next one will have the 0.02, etc. Now at some point I did this check for mistake thing. I don't think it works. I'm not going to use it. I will just figure out if there's a mistake, honestly. Besides that, we pretty much covered everything of those options. The only last two, we have the pre-export and the export, which we're just going to use at the moment. However, I first of all want to show another thing. In the main broom, the main thing, we also have collection settings right here. The first thing is should export. Well, should it export? You can uncheck this, but you can also just uncheck those here. Yeah, the camera and the eye, and it will also not export. The other thing is, if you scroll down in the collection setting, where is it? You have a few more settings here. For example, you can mark it as static mesh, as foliage, or as landscape. Landscape just literally does not work. Didn't apply it yet. This is a default static mesh, but you could also export it as foliage, meaning it would automatically become foliage in Unreal. So like the actual foliage asset. That's something for a different time or day. And you have use individual options. This is when you're exporting a lot of them, and you might want to have different export options for this specific broom, and the grass is different or whatever, right? We're going to not use that because this is literally the only thing I'm exporting right now. So let's go to pre-export. This should always be checked. I had it in there because I intended to write a different exporter, but we're using the default exporter anyway, so just this should always be checked. Now you can delete interior faces. Those here are essentially basic Blender options you have anyway. If you just select your mesh here and go delete interior. Okay, maybe it's not in there anymore. Delete interior. Maybe it was part of an add-on. I don't know. This is why this is a little bit janky. But you can weld in end. You can only non-manifold. You can weld only non-manifold. So it's going to select only the manifolds, only the holes essentially, which you then can merge together. And after that, you can delete the interiors again. Keep it that way. I usually know what I'm doing with my meshes, so I don't use them anyway. You can either check LODs. If it's not checked, you can build none. But if it's checked, you can also decide if you want auto LOD screen size. So it essentially decides the screen size automatically. Don't really want that. I already said it. And nanite is way too slow, so no thanks. If you want, you can also set custom depth. Now this only works if you export instances. You can export instances. So essentially if you shift a collection instance of your broom LOD 0, doesn't matter, right? It would be an instance of this 0 here. Yeah, it should just not be in here. It should just be anywhere else. Probably a dump. I'm just going to put this in dump. Dump will be deleted in the end. And if you have instances, you can have as many as you want. Those will be placed inside of the world of Unreal as well. So you don't necessarily have to place everything in Unreal directly. You can also place it in Blender if you really want it. I'm just not going to do this. I have a different way of doing that. I don't know how much longer I will support it, because it's kind of troublesome working around that instead of just exporting things. I think the idea of placing things in Blender sounds nice. It's just not in reality. For anything that's bigger than a room, you probably want to have some way control in Unreal of doing that. So anyway, there are a few more collections we have to cover here. First of all, socket. Sockets are super simple to understand. They are empty, so you can just make an empty. You parent it to the original empty, Control P. and this will become a socket. If you know Unreal, you know that you can place sockets on static meshes. Here, let's take a look at my cake. And you have a socket manager here, and you can essentially just place sockets, and those sockets are just pretty much, okay, you won't move for some reason, okay, I don't know. But those sockets are essentially just locations locally stored inside the mesh. And if you wanted, you could place those. It's usually fairly handy if you create like static meshes that are weapons or something, then you know where to grab the weapon. But, well, maybe for a broom this would make sense, and I would place like a socket here or something, right? But I'm just not going to do this, I'm not ready for that yet. I need to figure out my characters first of all. Now, we still have 4 more collections here. Those are the collision collections. So I'm going to show you the Unreal website, because I keep forgetting myself what is what, and I just have to read again. UBX is essentially just a box, so let's just go over this really quickly. If you want a UBX, you will have to go to the UBX here, Shift A, create yourself a cube. You can just go to objects here and just enable, where is it, wire, just change this to wire, and you essentially have an UBX. This is a box. You cannot deform it. You cannot go into edit mode and do something like this here. Broken, will not work, done. It's going to not export. You're going to stay in object mode, and very hard for Blender user to not hit Ctrl A and apply rotation scale, but you essentially just want to place a damn box. Yeah, so if you're like doing a box, surely you can, if you know your orientation, you can go in edit mode and drag this out, sure, right? But the point is, it must be an absolute perfect box, yeah, in order to export properly. This is just how this goes with UBX. However, I don't really want a box. Let's take a look over here. What do we have next? A capsule. A capsule sounds handy. We have a sphere, or the USP, or UCX. UCXs are custom meshes that don't have do you call this a catalyst? I don't know. Not an inside bend. They can only like bend outwards. Yeah. It's a bit more tricky creating a UCX, but it also works. And there's a little trick to the whole thing. Might be able to show you. Yeah, let's show you, why not? Let's just take the LOD 0 broom and make a copy. And I'm going to drop this in the what did I say? I already forgot. The UCX, right? It's important that it's in the correct one. And if you really want a UCX, it's relatively straightforward. You cannot, it's pretty mathematical. So if you go to geometry nodes and just create a new geometry, and you type in convex hull. Why do I have a, what do you do in there? Okay, sure, why not? And you just drop this in there. This is essentially the perfect UCX. There is no way of doing this better than this node. It's mathematical, correct. Now I could use that, or I could get a little bit more detail. So I'm going to delete this again, and I want a capsule, which is a UCP. Let's take a look at a UCP. Now the thing with a UCP is that you need to create yourself a sphere. I kind of forgot how I did this, what resolution I used, but I think it's fine to use the default and just go in edit mode and dissolve the middle one. I think that's how I did that. We'll see. And then you can just grab the whole top here and GZ. Important is that this part does not get deformed. So if you want to deform it now, you have to do it in object mode, and you cannot like SX or something like that. This does not work, right? So you have to be very careful about how you deform it, because the moment it's not a perfect capsule anymore, it will not take it. So I'm just going to place my origin really quickly here, just so I can, nope, that's not what I meant. So I can deform it a little bit better. RY -90. To place you right here. I'm going to scale it down in general, and then wireframe. Now I want it longer, obviously. You cannot SX this, because this would stretch the tip, right? So you have to go in edit mode and always be careful about how you deform it. And I'm going to put this in here, so sort of like that. And with that I have that. What other could we use here? I think for that part we can actually use an UCX. So I'm going to copy the whole base broom again, right? And I'm going to modify the base broom here really quickly. I'm just going to like delete the whole start here. Let's make it ES0 and then like a merge at center or something. Right, and then Alt G to put it back onto the origin. We're going to put in our geometry node here really quickly and convex hull, whatever. Actually, it's the same node. I don't know what I did there. Probably, you know what? I think I know what I did. I probably made a modifier out of that. But it's literally just a geo node with like the convex hull. And you can see what happens, right? This is fairly fine. And now I end up with like 2 collisions here. So I'm going to change those to wired. And with that we have collisions. Voila. It's just important that they are in the correct collection. You can see my UCX is actually wrong. And is there... Ah, there we go. We got a bug. Unlink it. Oh, come on. Now you unlinked it from both. Unlink. Am I correct? This is the UCX and the capsule is the UCP. This is correct. That's really about it. If you make collisions, I don't know, like a stone, made a stone where the whole collision is essentially just a convex hull. It's fairly easy if you're used to Blender movement to quickly create whole assets essentially. And let's get to exporting. Now, the thing is, you should make always sure you save at that point. Because the way I exported the coding is a bit of jank. I don't exactly remember why I did it that way. It works, so it works. And I'm not going to touch it. Eventually, I will probably rewrite the whole add-on and make it a little bit more nicer and whatever. Because it's fairly easy for me to modify the whole thing. It's just a bit chaotic coded. Anyway, the way we're doing that is to make sure only the stuff we want to export is actually enabled over here, right? Only the broom is correct. I saved. I will hit pre-export and weird stuff will happen. It will become black and whatever. Don't worry about it. I've set it specifically up that way so Blender exports it correctly over the default FBX. Yeah, it's very particular. And with that done, do not save. From this point, do not save. Hit export. And now you have to hit Ctrl Z, so your whole mesh is back. If you save after you hit pre-export, you fucked it up. It's broken. It's not really that hard to remember. Save before it, hit pre-export, export, Ctrl Z. It works, trust me. Now you can hit an export open folder and it will open the folder wherever you saved your Blender file. In here, you will see a text data is created with a bunch of gibberish. This gibberish we will need in a second. Back in Unreal, I first of all need to find my actual script here, which I put in overall tools, and there I have the import utilities, and I'm going to run that. It's pretty much everything is coded natively in Unreal here, so this is native blueprints more or less. It's in, if you know the blueprint utilities, you know that this is just pretty basic. Anyway, here we have to go over a few things. If you set it up once, it's not that troublesome, but here's the path for your materials. So where we will find the materials, if I'm going a few steps back here. For example, my materials are right here in all content, custom materials. You can see this. Usually it starts with game. Game is the equivalent of content. This is just how Unreal does it. I don't know why. Then under custom assets, 1_material, 1_material. This is where my materials lay. Now it wants the Blender folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my Blender folder here. Exactly this one here. I'm going to copy this and this goes just straight up in here. You can see I already put it in there. It's by default in there. Place folder path to place stuff in. Now this is in right here under game. So content, custom assets, cervix, right? Path for a static mesh foliage. This is for static mesh foliage, which we don't have right now. I'll probably explain this at a different point, but it's essentially the same thing. You just give it a path to where the static mesh foliage lays. Copy paste from created text file. This is essentially exactly what it says. This is where we need our whole thing here. Control A, Control Z, and I'm going to click in here, Control A, Control V, and then we have a few extra options down here. Again, it's been a while since I got this, so I'm just going to roughly try to remember. Auto import is just so you don't have to import, click import on every single one. If you uncheck this, it will open up the import window on every single import. And if you have like 50 or 500 assets, you don't want to hit import on every single one of them. Spawn actor from Blender, well, that's pretty much what it says. If you have instances like I described earlier, it will spawn the instances. Same goes for the foliage. Destroy previous actor. What this will do is if you already have this exact asset imported and you're just going to re-import it, it will destroy the previous actor inside Unreal. If you check this, override LOD Screensizes on import. Well, this is fairly simple. If you click this, it will override in Unreal existing LOD screen sizes by the one you're importing from Blender. The other stuff you don't really need to worry about. This is like, you can do stuff with sockets, you can spawn other items on sockets, you can move multiple selected objects. It's not really big of a deal, it doesn't really belong there. Anyway, with all of that being correct, I'm just going to hit import and hope nothing breaks. Surprisingly rarely things actually break. Honestly, whenever I use it, I'm scared because, you know, I got it myself and you think, oh, everything is going to explode. It really doesn't. Sometimes obviously you get errors and whatever, and sometimes the texture is missing because, oh, I forgot it, or I forgot to put in the right parameter, or forgot to give it the right future material instance name here, right? But it works surprisingly well, and I'm just dragging this in here, and there is the broom with the texture, with the correct settings, inside the correct folder, with the exact same folder layout. I personally think this is very handy. Now, obviously I did a lot of clicking and things setting up in Blender, and you might think, oh, this takes a while, right? But this is stuff you usually would need to do in Unreal. Like setting up all the LODs, setting up the collisions, those are things you have to find and do in Unreal. You see what I mean? Like, and some of those assets inside here, I don't know if my movement currently works, but for example, the bridge here, I did not make the bridge, by the way. This is my partner made it, my working buddy, and she has no real idea about Unreal. She just followed the add-on essentially, right? And she just set it up, and all the collisions essentially just work. Now, they are a little bit tiny with a reason, but the collisions are just perfect. If we take a look here, she really did a good job there. She never used Blender before, by the way. Like, I taught her Blender and she just went along with it. Where do I see the collisions? Probably somewhere here. Little simple collisions. You see that shit? And it's like so well placed. She did a good job. Even you could even fly a pigeon character through that. Because it's handy to place those things in Blender. I'm not sure how she did that. Oh, she placed a bazillion boxes there. Maybe not that perfect. Well, who knows. It put a lot of work into that, gotta say. I probably would have cheaped out on that, but alright. Let's just observe our asset right here. Let's take a look at the simple collisions here, if this actually worked or if I messed up. Simple collisions, and you see, following the structure of the add-on makes it just work. And again, usually people just want one click export add-on and ooh, it is inside Unreal, right? But in reality, you have to do so much more in Unreal then, and I'd rather do that in Blender first and just have it always within the setup and just go out with it, you know what I mean? Like the whole LODs and the LOD screen sizes, or what material to select. People also just think they want to export the material. They don't really want to export the material, really. You want to have a master material that's just on everything, or a few multiple master materials that are on everything, right? Some for transparency, some for static meshes. And it seems natural to me to select a material you think you want to have in the future, right? Not export one you randomly winked together in Blender. I guess this is the first video about this. I will probably make more on this. I really want to rewrite the add-on because it's not that pretty. There is a lot of jank in there. Some stuff just doesn't work anymore. And if you're a user from the outside, you don't really know what to click and how to follow the structure unless you watch the actual video and make sense of it. It would be nice to have like a hierarchy structure when you're selecting objects or whatever. So you're not really bound by the collections. But that would be a lot of work. Anyway.